Hey, hi, hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess and I'm here with an update on my anti-curriculum. If you didn't watch the first video, I would suggest you go back to that one, especially if you're curious on how this is like formatted, because I won't go back through that. But I did get the idea from this channel. I can't think of the name right now. And I just want to say, I think this is the way. So anti-curriculum is basically if you are someone who enjoys learning and you need a little structure to it, but maybe not as much as we tend to put around things when we want to learn, especially with the trend of creating your own personal curriculum. They're often very lofty, have more like rigid rules or parameters, and often leads to failure, at least for me. And so coming across her video was so helpful, and I'm here with an update. So my first topic that I wanted to learn about was the former Yugoslavia. I know that sounds really random, and the people who came under my video were like, you know, wow, somebody wants to learn about this. And I'm gonna say this one word one time because I have since learned not the best term, but I was on threads and people, it's not a new conversation. We're talking about how the United States should be split up into smaller countries because it's too big. So someone said you need to look up the Balkanization of Yugoslavia and see why that's a bad idea. And I was like, what does that mean? And I went on the and then that was in my mind. So anyway, that was my curriculum. So I will say that the way that she does it with like starting with your topic, so I put the Balkans, and then you start with one thing that you readily had accessible, so you don't have to go out and buy a book, something you have. I started with a documentary on YouTube. Now I did have a plan to go to something else, and then I went to something else, so it's not perfect. And it's kind of chicken scratch, but basically you start with your main topic and you go from one thing, but you don't plan it out, so you just go naturally where it takes you. So after I finished the documentary, I was like, okay, I still have these questions, and then I listened to I did write down all of your recommendations, and I haven't gotten to all of them, but that doesn't mean that I am not going to get to them. But I listened to the Yugoslavia history from History is Sexy podcast. It was 4 episodes. And then I listened to one episode that was War Tourism, It Could Happen Here podcast. That was specifically about Sarajevo. I did read a book. It's called Zlata's Diary. And then I also started a 4-part documentary on Kosovo. However, I have paused, and I will tell you why. I don't consider this finished. But again, I love that this isn't like rigid. I don't have like write a paper at the end, or you should be able to present this, blah, 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 blah. I don't know, whatever way to measure it. Because one of the things she talks about in her like setting up your anti-curriculum is like, do you want like a casual knowledge? Do you really want intensive knowledge? And mine was just like, I just wanted like a basic understanding, because I've heard of the countries, I've heard of Yugoslavia, I just don't know a lot about the Balkans, so I just wanted to learn about it. Well, I have, but that has also been like, okay, well, I also need to learn about this thing and this thing. Don't necessarily need to, but I would like to. However, where I was, the first part of that documentary of Kosovo, I was like, you know what? I need a break, because it's a lot of heavy information. So that's where I'm pausing currently, and then I'm going to start a new curriculum. But again, I have all your recommendations written down, so I plan on continuing that documentary and then like listening to some of these books and different things that people have recommended. So since I was just going in with the desire for my own just personal knowledge, I don't feel confident to be like, yes, I can teach this now. Like, I'm not a history professor all of a sudden. So I'm not going to tell you or explain to you the history of the Balkans Yugoslavia, the fall of. That's just, I don't think I've learned enough. It's not cemented in my brain enough to tell you that. If you are interested, I do recommend you like look into it, because there's so much and I have just barely scratched the surface. So I'm just going to go through some things that were surprising, that really stuck out to me, and then where things I'm still curious about and want to learn more about when I come back to it. And since I have a good foundation, I don't think that I need to like dedicate as much time, and so I can do more like watch this or read this thing here and there to add to my knowledge, if that makes sense. This is what works for me. So far so good. We're only like one subject in, but I like this method. So again, I started with a YouTube documentary, and there's a lot of conversation online because of course I was reading the comments. I've been looking on Reddit about different content that's out there, documentaries, podcasts, and if they are, you know, if it's created by a certain person, then maybe it has a different perspective. Maybe people disagree with that. There was another one that I wanted to watch, but it's not in English. It's also not dubbed in English. And so then I listened to that podcast episode about it. So I just trying to learn the information, and I realized that there are all of these different groups of people involved in the story. And so there's always going to be differences. And it is not, you know, I'm not getting this from someone's lived experience. Like some of it is, but like I have not spoken to like a survivor of the Bosnian genocide or something like that. So I just want to say, I feel like I've gotten a lot of good information, but I just know that there is a lot out there and it may or may not be correct. So one of the big things that stuck out to me was just realizing some of the overlap with Yugoslavia, its formation, and with World War I and World War II. Because before World War I, a lot of Serbs lived outside of Serbia. 40% lived in Bosnia, and they were rebelling against the Danubian monarchy, and some of the Serbian Bosnians made a plot to take down the heir to the throne, the Archduke of Austria, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, you know, the guy who was shot, and then that started World War I. So like I didn't realize like that was kind of connected. And so, you know, then that happens. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia, I think, is started like after or during World War I. I have 1918 written down. And it's supposed to be the land basically of Southern Slavs. So it's Macedonia, Slovenia, Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I thought that Albania was a part of that, but it was not. It's right there, but it was not part of Yugoslavia. Things I also didn't realize going on, like obviously then we had World War II, and when we hear about concentration camps, at least for me, I've always just heard about them being ones created by the Germans, and I didn't realize that there were some created by other groups like Croatia. And even later, when I get to later stuff, that there were still concentration camps after World War II ended, or like new ones that were created. So yeah, Croatia had their own concentration camps. They didn't have gas chambers. They used, it said, knives and axes. And they also had Jewish people in their concentration camps, Serbians and Romani people in theirs. This says that they're basically the Croatian rebel group, the Ustaša. Apologies for any pronunciation, okay? I'm trying. Killed more than 80,000 people in their concentration camps, and that's just something I did not know about. So I kept seeing a name around Yugoslavia saying Tito. I'm like, who is Tito? That is not a name that I'm thinking of when I think of Slavic countries. His name was, I think his name was Josip Broz. But he like picked a name for himself and he thought Tito sounded cool. Anyway, he eventually becomes the prime minister of Yugoslavia. He had spent some time, if he was not in World War I, he definitely fought in World War II. He was captured by the Russians. He's a communist. And he ends up being the leader, and so all of these countries still together, right? I definitely understood or thought about Yugoslavia and attached that to communism just because in my American perspective, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I've just associated those like Eastern countries with like Soviet Russia, communism, Eastern Bloc, all of that. So I was like, okay. But so he was apparently people loved Tito. Like obviously he had people who weren't fans of him, but people loved him. Like some people like obsessively really loved Tito. And so it was interesting because he's really a communist, but they had somewhat of a socialist society. And after, obviously, this is after World War II and after the formation of Yugoslavia. And it was just really interesting to see all the different like economic things that were happening, the booms where tourism was starting in like the 60s and 70s to Croatia. So I just thought it was cool because I didn't realize that many people were vacationing there that early. But still, there was good happening within Yugoslavia and also bad, because there was a point, I think in one of the things I was listening to where they were talking about all the different groups and how overall, generally, people were getting along. Something else I didn't realize, because I said the 6 republics, 5 nations. So they are all Slavic. However, they use both the Cyrillic and the Latin alphabet. They had Serbo-Croat as a language, Slovene, Macedonian, and Albanian as a language. And they had Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, and Serbian Orthodox. So of course you have all these different ethnic groups and religions, and that does cause some issues that seemed to calm for a while, but that's going to come back up. So I just didn't realize there was that much diversity in that area. But again, I said the people were mostly getting along for a while, but still there are people who want to be independent. Unfortunately, nationalism is just a thing that always happens, and people are wanting to be their own autonomous region and country. Croatia, because like I said, with the tourism going to Croatia, some of the countries are doing better, or some of the regions are doing better than some of the others. But that means like if Croatia is bringing in all this money from tourism, but Macedonia is not, then some of the money from Croatia's tourism is going to Macedonia. People weren't liking that. They wanted to keep their money in their area. And so there is, some up and down. And then towards the end of the 70s, they're really getting into an economic crisis. And this like made me, I don't want to kind of have heart palpitations because it's just sounding familiar. That's the thing with studying history, is like, okay, sure, it's interesting to learn about things, but then you also see something that happened back then, and then you're looking at the present and you're like, I don't like that. I've seen this before. But there were starting to be some economic crises going on towards the end of the 70s. And it was because Yugoslavia was borrowing a lot of money from countries, and then they were asking for that money back. Tito dies in 1980, and this is really like the start of the end of Yugoslavia. And from one of the podcasts that I was listening to, they were saying that the countries were recalling their loans, and Yugoslavia, did not have the money. Their basically economy collapses. By 1983, they have 45% inflation. By 85, it's 100% inflation. By 1987, it's 250% inflation. Oh my God. So then there's areas that are wanting to leave, and then there's conflict with each other. So there's lots of moving pieces, obviously, because we have all of these different regions with these different groups, and now the one person who was kind of holding it all together has died, and he didn't appoint someone to come behind him. I guess there's still like whoever was, I don't know if you would call it a cabinet. So there were still some people like in the government, but they didn't really have someone in charge. And then is just, goes to shit after that. And so the republics are basically becoming suspicious of each other, and they're wanting to separate. And one big name that comes in here is Slobodan Milosevic, who was the president of a Serbian party, and he leads to a lot of essentially death and destruction in Yugoslavia. So after the podcast and the documentary, which covered a lot of stuff, like I have not gone over even like a quarter of the stuff that it covered, I was curious on, because they are touched on in these, I was curious about the war in Bosnia And so then I got some of that in the one podcast, The History of Sexy. And one of the things they talk about is the siege of Sarajevo. That's when I listened to the podcast episode from It Could Happen Here. That podcast episode was really talking about the alleged tourism where foreign people allegedly came into the country and paid to shoot at civilians. But to go back a little bit, again, Serbia basically wanted to ethnically cleanse Bosnia because most of the people there were Muslim. And that leads to the Bosnian War, which I believe lasts for 3 years. And that was just, oh God, it's just heartbreaking to learn about. So learning about the siege of Sarajevo, which is a city that's kind of like sits down and there's like mountains and hills around it, and their army basically surrounded the city. And so people were just, you know, trying to go about life, but they could get sniped at any moment being in the street because they're like perched up here. They're cut off from resources and water and food. And that also played into when I listened to Zlata's diary, which was basically, it's a diary of a young girl who was living during the siege of Sarajevo and talking about not having electricity, not having food, learning of all her loved ones who were being killed. And also in Bosnia, in a separate city or town that was supposed to be a safe haven with UN peacekeepers, Srebrenica, again, apology for the pronunciation, where over 8,000 men and boys were separated from the women and they were executed. And the Bosnian War itself resulted in over 100,000 civilian deaths, 2 million people displaced, 20 to 50,000 women raped, so many mass graves. They had concentration camps, and this is in the 1990s. So this is almost 50 years after World War II is over, and it's the never again, and there are concentration camps again in Bosnia. But this time it's mostly the Bosnian Muslims that are in the concentration camps. And it's like something I had heard of, did not know much about. Like I had heard of Sarajevo, I've seen Srebrenica, didn't know how you pronounced it. And so that was a lot. And then I was like, okay, what happened in Kosovo? And that's when I started the documentary, and I had to pause because I had to pause. There's just so much history there. And that's not even getting into the Austrian-Hungarian or Habsburg Empire and the Ottoman Empire that had control. They each had control over parts of those countries beforehand, because then that plays into a lot of things that happened in the early 1900s and then into the formation of Yugoslavia. And that still was really, I got that on the Bosnian War. I still haven't gone to Kosovo or looked. And then I started Googling Slovenia, and then that was saying something, and it said Illyrian, and I was like, I've heard that word before, and I clicked on that, and then I was saying something about a region in France, and I was like, oh my God. So there's still things I'm curious about in the region. Here are some things that I still would like to learn about the Balkans. This is not exclusive, but these are just some of the things. The war in Kosovo, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, the history of Slovenia, the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially like, why is it two, like the two names, and why is that one country? Also, how did Croatia get all of that coastline? It's just sad that we see history, people see history, they know these things, and I no longer believe in that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I think that people know history and they want to repeat it, but they look at what was done and they're like, this is what they did wrong, and here's how I can get away with it. I don't know. I just think there are some just inherently terrible people. And we just see that time and time again. So I know I said a lot of stuff and I didn't even cover how, everything. But if you don't know anything about the history of that region, I think it is worthy to look into it. I can link what I listened to and watched under this video, but I still have all of the recommendations that y'all gave me under that video. So there will be probably more things that I end up reading or watching to learn more. But I had to take a pause. I did. So, what is next? I wanted something lighter, so it's going to be knitting. I'm tired of being jealous of all my friends who knit. I'm just so impatient, and it's not unique to me. I know many people, like, you start a hobby and you just want to be really good, and knitting is just something that is to be fair, I have not tried that hard. Like, I've tried a little bit, but I get really flustered. So I'm trying to think of how I want to structure this curriculum, because obviously it's going to be different than just learning about a time or a place in history. But I have a ton of yarn in here, and Mara sent me so many that were already started, but I also need to learn to cast on. So I'm gonna switch my camera so that you're looking at my notebook, and we're gonna come up with this curriculum, and then I'll be back to update you. I don't know when though, there's no time limit. So we got 4 questions. What do I want to learn? Why do I want to learn it? How much time? And where is the first immediately accessible place? So let's flip here. What do I want to learn? 1. What do I want to learn? To knit. And to start off, a coaster. I would like to successfully knit a coaster. We're starting small. Why do I want to learn this? We're not talking about my handwriting, remember? To have a tactile hobby, to eventually make my own clothes. Now, how much time do I have to learn? So last time I put 1 to 2 hours a week. I don't have a traditional job, so my job is flexible and I can do things whenever. So I said 1 to 2 hours a week. And so obviously I didn't schedule any like specific sit down time when I was doing my anything about Yugoslavia. Some of it I sat in the bed and watched a documentary. Something else I was decluttering and listening to a podcast. So I think for knitting, I need a little bit more structure just so that I actually do it. I want to aim for at least 20 minutes. Okay, I just got off of FaceTime with my friend to help me with knitting, and she was like, I think you're gonna need more than 20 minutes a day. That's just not enough. She's like, okay, if you get to 20 minutes and you're really frustrated and you want to quit, fine, but try to push past that. So I'm gonna, so I'm just not gonna have a time. I'm gonna, maybe at least 45 minutes 5 times a week. I really want to learn to knit, and so it's gonna take more commitment, and I don't want to like give myself a hard line if it has to be an hour every day and then I fail, but 20 minutes is also not enough. So I'm gonna aim for 45 minutes 5 times a week. Well, we'll see, but 20 minutes isn't enough. Whether that's watching a video about knitting technique and then like trying different ways of casting on, or like working on the coaster. So I'm just gonna say that that's what I'm gonna aim for. If I don't do it every day, fine, but I'm daily, I have the time to do that. And lastly, the first immediate place I can start. Now last time I didn't have any books or anything, so I started with the YouTube documentary because that was quickly accessible. Now I already have yarn and I have needles. I have a free pattern for a coaster that I already have saved, and also a YouTube video to go along with that. So it is, I think it's Nifty Knitting? I'll have to look. But it's basically their coaster pattern and the YouTube video. So that is an easy place for me to start. Now last time, obviously this is gonna be different because with the way I did it the first time, she recommended taking notes while you were learning and then to journal like things that stood out to you, any questions that you still have. So this is obviously going to be a little different for how I structure this. So I think instead of journaling, when I knit, I do a little video update, you know, maybe a 60-second video update to say either what I watched or what I learned or what I knitted. So yeah, whatever questions, and then I can just write down questions that come up, and I have a bunch of friends I can reach out to answer those questions, maybe get on a FaceTime to help me learn. And my end product is I just want at least one coaster and then to keep going from there. But this is something that I have been wanting to do and I just keep putting off, and if I don't start, I'm just never, and that's my thing. I have to start, I have to get in some practice. I need to make some ugly things so I can make this happen. So that is my knitting curriculum. It's getting toasty. So I have multiple options. I don't think I would use this for a coaster. I do like this color that I have, but I also have, this is just some cheap yarn. This is the yarn that I actually bought. The first thing that I was going to try to knit was going to be a sweater for my dog, but he is no longer with us, so I didn't make that. But yeah, I feel like this would be a really pretty color for a coaster. I don't know if this, I would need to look at the pattern to see if this is even the right kind. So I'm gonna look at those and look at the different, what do you call it? The weight and stuff. I don't know all the lingo yet of the knitting, and hopefully in a few weeks you'll see an update. And I hopefully in that update I have a coaster. It might be ugly, but hopefully I have a coaster. So if you are working on any kind of curriculum, I would love to know what. Some people shared some really cool things that they were learning or interested in learning under the last video. And I was like, y'all have got to stop. I'm getting too many ideas, but actually don't stop. Tell me all the things. So yeah, if you're working on a curriculum, how's it going? What have you learned? Are you still in it? Are you switching to something else? And if you haven't been working on one, are you going to start one? I want to be a lifelong learner, and I'm finally, I don't know why it took me so long, but finally accepting I don't have to go to school and get a degree in different things to learn about different things. I don't know why that's so hard to get through your head, Jessica. If you stuck around this long, comment under my first video about the anti-curriculum. Someone made a comment that stuck with me. They were saying they wish there was like a place where we could all like share, so people are learning different things and ways to share that's not, I don't know, that's like not a book club, but I don't know how you would share it. I was thinking like maybe a Discord or something. You could just talk about what you're learning, or you could make a PowerPoint if you want. I don't know. I've been playing with some ideas, so if you're interested in any kind of like, you know, central place where people who are learning various topics can share them, let me know and I can just brainstorm on what could work best. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Save less, hydrate, and moisturize, and sunscreen. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.